Any situation that puts vaccines at risk is considered an emergency. An emergency could be a cold chain equipment breakdown, a major power supply failure, fire, flood, typhoon, or other natural calamities, and similar situations. Cold chain managers and NIP coordinators at all levels of the cold chain system are responsible for emergency response. Thus, specific actions and contingency plans should be clearly laid out, disseminated, understood, and followed. Diyos marhay na aldaw o banggi sa indugabos. I am Dr. Monre Isaiah Mansilla, and this chapter and lecture aims to enhance your knowledge and skills to number one, identify the key elements of a contingency plan or an emergency. Second is plan and develop actions to respond to emergencies. And third is become familiar with the different possible cold chain emergencies. Each health facility faces a unique set of risks that needs to be planned for. Hence, it is important that during the planning and or review of the contingency plan of your cold chain storage facility, you follow these key steps. First, we need to identify your critical operations or functions. Second, need to identify the threats that could harm each critical functions. The third is we need to analyze the impact of each risks or risk interactions. Fourth, we need to estimate the likelihood of each threat. Fifth is we need to identify mitigation strategies or an alternative. Sixth is we need to assess and prioritize mitigation strategies or alternatives. Seventh is we need to select and commit the resources required for specific risks, mitigation strategies, or alternatives. And eight, we need to communicate the plan to all participants for implementation. It is important to identify risks that are high impact and high probability risks. And the goal is to mitigate the identified risks from high risk to moderate risks, or better yet, to an acceptable risk. High impact and high probability cold chain emergencies include 1. The breakdown of an equipment or a vehicle, which include breakdown of refrigerator on a weekend, breakdown of temperature monitoring devices during transport, etc. Two is power outage. So during and after typhoon, we usually expect power outage in bigger region. Hence, we need to have a contingency plan for this. The third is freezing of freeze-sensitive vaccines. Well, with machine errors or placement of vaccines near the wall of the refrigerator, there is a risk of freezing. Hence, we need to know what to do and how to mitigate these risks. Fourth is darkening of the VVM color. So this is basically applicable for most of the routine immunization vaccines. Well, we also need to recognize the stockouts or delays in vaccine arrival. Likewise, unplanned delivery of large quantities of vaccines to facilities with limited storage capacity. Well, we might expect this due to push allocation mechanisms. Next will be the absence of person responsible. So this might be due to quarantine or isolation of the personnel due to COVID-19, or maybe he or she is on leave or retirement. Next will be destruction of vaccines due to natural calamities or poor maintenance of buildings. So this include contingency plans for flooding, earthquake, well, we can include volcanic eruptions and fire. There are several risk treatment options known. So this includes avoiding the risk, okay? However, there are also other options like removing the risks, changing the likelihood of the risk, changing the consequence. Well, there is also risks sharing and retaining the risk. A contingency plan should be site and equipment specific. It should be context specific, taking into account the risk treatment options availed. A good practice is to identify the elements and regularly review and rehearse the procedure listed in the contingency plans. The key element of a contingency plan include 1. Ensure that all affected vaccines are placed in the recommended storage temperature. For routine immunization, it is usually positive 2 to positive 8 degrees Celsius as soon as possible. However, for those vaccines requiring a negative 15 to negative 25 degrees Celsius or a freezer, then we need to transfer those vaccines to that kind of environment immediately. Then, we also need to identify alternative locations where these vaccines can be safely stored. Or maybe we need to know where an ice can be obtained immediately on a short notice. We need to prepare and maintain at least two emergency responses plan. If plan A does not work, then at least we still have a plan B. Also, a post-emergency contact details of personnel and location where they can be accessed at all times. Next is a clearly described initial and follow-up actions that can be implemented both inside and outside working hours. And lastly, we need to review the plan at least once a year to ensure that it is still valid. Again, to emphasize, the primary goal during an emergency is to ensure that all vaccines are placed in the recommended temperature. So usually this is positive 2 to positive 8, especially for the COVID, Sinovac, and AstraZeneca, and the routine immunization vaccines. However, for other vaccines requiring a different set of temperature, then we need to transfer them into another equipment that can actually provide that kind of temperature as soon as possible after an unforeseen or cold chain emergency has occurred. In order to achieve this goal, again, we need to do emergency actions. Hence, we need to act fast. So actions include, number one, we need to locate the source of the alarm or the problem. We need to identify the root cause of the alarm or the problem and address immediately whenever possible. If the problem cannot be immediately corrected, we need to safeguard the vaccines based on our existing contingency plan. Once the emergency has been stabilized, we need to check, we need to see if these vaccines have been damaged by heat. So we need to check the VVM or the temperature monitor inside the equipment, or maybe by freezing. So we need to conduct shake test in the case of NIP vaccines. If vaccine damage is suspected, we need to label the vaccines as quarantined or suspected damaged vaccines. And we need to quarantine them at the appropriate storage temperature. So we need not put it outside the cold chain system while we are not yet sure that it is damaged. So while we are contemplating and until we make the final decision, we need to place this vaccine still on the recommended temperature. If damage is confirmed, then vaccines can be taken out of the cold chain for final disposal. And, well, of course, we need to report this damage to the next higher level. We need to complete the appropriate report and inform the supervisor who will decide on the necessary follow actions to be taken. The following are some possible emergency situations and their corresponding actions. So let us start with power outage. The contingency plan should clearly answer the questions what, where, when, who, why, and how. One possible set of answer is shown here. So we need to be specific in the plan. We need to state the scenario where the plan is applicable. In this example, the contingency plan is applicable for power outage. Then, where is this plan applicable? Is it in the rural health unit? Now, we need to be more specific. Is it applicable for RHU1 only, RHU2 only, RHU3 only, or for all? Then, we determine the duration of the power interruption or the outage. Is this contingency plan applicable for short duration power outage? Or will it be applicable to outage lasting days, weeks, or months? Who are the key actors for this plan? Who will be in command? Who will be responsible for tasks? Then, we need to be clear of our objectives so that basically we can also identify and align our next actions to achieve it. Lastly, the procedure to accomplish the objective should be clearly presented in the plan. Here is an example of a procedure. Here we can see the actions to be performed, the specific action or the specific person responsible with their contact details, the time element, the condition, etc. It is important to note that in planning, especially for power outage, we need to consider the model of the equipment available in the facility. We need to check the refrigerator or the freezer unit holding over time to determine whether is it can the equipment sustain and maintain the required temperature for a certain duration of time despite the power outage or not. Hold over time indicates the ability of the appliance to maintain the vaccine load within the recommended temperature range when power supply has been interrupted. It is measured as the time between switching off the appliance and when the warmest internal temperature reached positive 10 degrees Celsius for refrigerators and freezers at a given ambient temperature. Example, for TCW 3000, the Dometec TCW 3000 can maintain the vaccine load within the recommended temperature range of positive 2 to positive 8 for 61 hours, given the external temperature is at 32 degrees Celsius. But if the temperature of the room wherein the ref is hotter, well, let's say at 43 degrees Celsius, then the holdover time will also be decreased. So this time it's going to be 22 hours and not 61 hours. Here's the continuation of the procedure earlier presented, this time providing us possible actions for power outage lasting 4 hours or less. Likewise, presented here are the possible actions to be done when the electric supply has been restored. There should also be a contingency plan for power outage lasting for longer duration as shown in here in this example. Here are some notes for each cold chain emergencies. For vaccine refrigerator breakdown, We need to find someone in your facility trained to conduct simple troubleshooting and repair of the unit. If none, request support from the next higher level. If the required repair work is minor, transfer the vaccine to another functional cold chain equipment or in cold boxes or vaccine carriers. However, if major repair work is needed, transfer the vaccine to a functional cold chain equipment or look for available vaccine storage equipment nearby if more temporary storage spaces is necessary while the problem is diagnosed and repair is in progress. In the case of fire, flood, and earthquake, prepare a contingency plan aligned with the overall organizational evacuation plan. If the event is predictable, as in the case of flooding, immediately transfer all vaccines, including cold chain equipment, if possible, to a higher or safer location. However, for a non-predictable emergencies, do not try to save the vaccines during fire, flood, or earthquake is in progress. Avoid risks of getting hurt or being trapped in the vaccine store. Do not enter the vaccine store after the disaster unless it is cleared safe by authority. Likewise, immediately identify alternative cold storage equipment to safe keep the vaccines that remained potent. Any vaccine damage or potentially contaminated as a result of the disaster should be recorded and reported as wastage according to the national policy. In the case of fire, investigate the cause of the fire and carry out necessary investigations or interventions to avoid a similar situation in the future. To emphasize, prevention is better than cure. To avoid fire due to faulty electrical system, please let an electrician check the status of the cold chain storage. Consult first if we are to add another electrical equipment such as vaccine ref or vaccine freezer to ensure that the line can safely supply. Please inform all staff about the contingency plan and ensure that they are all aware of their roles in the plan as well as the general objective of the plan. Also, please do not wait until an emergency occurs. Please rehearse the plan before they are needed. Again, the most common emergencies in cold chain are breakdown of equipment or vehicle, power outage, freezing of freeze-sensitive vaccines, darkening of VVM color for the National Immunization Program vaccines, stockouts, and planned delivery of large quantities of vaccines to the facility with limited storage capacity, absence of person responsible, and last but definitely not the least is the destruction of vaccines due to natural calamities or poor maintenance of a building. Now my question is, do you have your contingency plan for each of these cold chain emergencies? Maybe now is the right time to make one. Thank you very much for listening. Sana po ay may natutunan kayong bagong kaalaman at para po sa ibang mga video, maaari po kayong manood sa NIP Bicol sa YouTube. Salamat po, Diyos mabalos tabi.